Is there anybody here from out of town? People who didn't actually know me before this talk? So, woohoo, great, thank you. Welcome to coming. We appreciate everyone. Welcome. I'm a longtime Indy native and very happy to be speaking at CircleCityCon and volunteering at CircleCityCon and having everyone here. For everybody else who showed up, thank you as well. I know I got a lot of friends in the audience, so thank you. And I'd also like to thank CircleCityCon for this opportunity. This is the first time I've been able to speak at a security conference, so very excited and very nervous. So I've, let's see, on my checklist, I've placated the audience and I've lowered expectations, so we can move forward, okay? So user awareness, we're doing it wrong, right? So this talk basically came to me as I've been out doing consulting work with firms. I do a lot of stuff in PCI, HIPAA, general ISO controls, and every one of these control schemes, whether it's NIST or whatever, name your regulation, name your framework, usually has a section on user awareness, right? And that user awareness typically looks like we're going to sit you down in front of a computer once a year, and we're going to have a PowerPoint slide deck run through. It's going to have a questionnaire at the end, if you're lucky, of about 4 questions, and then never think about security for the next 11 and a half months until the next time that PowerPoint's required, right? I'm sure everybody in this room has had to sit through that painful slide deck and had to answer those same questions, right? With not an opportunity to, test out of it to begin with, right? If I can answer the questions, I'm already aware. So let's move on to the next topic, right? So, you know who I am. That's who I am. That slide before was what I do. I've always been a nerd, right? Ever since Battlestar Galactica, the original, right? So that tells you how old I am. That's a Cylon in case anybody here was too young to remember what the original Cylons look like. Okay, right, so why do we need security awareness, right? Because users keep clicking on shit, right? Look at every breach that's happened, and I'm not telling anything in here that anybody doesn't already know, that they continue to click on things and get owned, and then that allows the attacker in and blah, 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 blah. And I'm not going to go through the kill chain because you all know it, right? But at the end of the day, it's because somebody did something they probably shouldn't have done, right? And I did not think of click on shit, by the way. I give that all to Boris at DerbyCon, or when I heard it first. But why do they do it? Anybody have an idea why they do it? No. It is fun. I give you that. It is fun. Yes? Exactly. Yes. Right. Exactly right. And all these were right. But the one that is closest to the next point of my messaging is just that. We have continued to train users for the past 30 years. We send them a link and an email to do whatever. We send them a link and email to do their security awareness training. We send them a link and an email to open up a PDF to read a policy. So whose fault is it? Is it the user's fault or is it our fault in IT? And I say IT in a large community of people that have worked in computers for a long time, right? We need to change the way we do the training. We need to change the way we do the communications inside of large organizations. I'm not going to address the latter. That's something for another topic. But let's just talk about security awareness, okay? These are some of my small observations and a lot of other people's hard work and analysis that I stole from the internet, okay? So I talked about some of the things that some of the different schemes require, right? So if you look at PCI, right? You're going to train developers in secure coding. Right, you're going to look at people as they come into your stores and steal your POSs and say they're with maintenance. You're going to actually check their IDs, make sure that they're supposed to be there stealing your cash register. Or you're actually going to have a program that teaches people about security awareness, at least annually and on hire. This is even better, HIPAA, right? So this is my go-to. It's one I've been around with for the longest. You know, we're going to have periodic. And everything's periodic and reasonable under the law, so that means you go ask your counsel, how often should we do it? And they're going to say, yearly, right, as the risk dictates, right? So you got to do login monitoring, got to do, hey, malware is bad, and you got to have strong passwords and don't share them, right? And then should be given whenever environmental or operational changes, when anything happens, right? And operational environmental, unfortunately, doesn't mean when the risks change outside your organization, when threat intel tells you that things are changing. It just says when you make a change in the way you do business in healthcare. And I tell you, healthcare, in the 15 years that I've been involved with healthcare, it hasn't changed business very much. I think it's radically changed recently with the accountable care, and that's a whole other discussion, but overall, they're healing sick people and getting paid for it. So the business doesn't really change that much to a healthcare provider, the way they see it. So ISO, right? Everyone's going to know the policies. We're going to have a policy in place. Ongoing security training should be about the requirements, legal responsibility, business controls, and the correct use of this stuff. Nothing in here about threats that are currently occurring outside your environment, inside your environment, incident response, feedback loop, nothing like that. Rev 4, the 353, and this is the last one. I know everyone's getting bored to death of compliance, right? But that's what's driven these programs. So that's, I'm trying to make a point here. So as part of training initial new users, when required, and when there's change, frequency decided by the organization, right? But here's a little control enhancement, right? We'll include practical exercises in security awareness to include actual cyber attacks. Well, that's better. This is Rev 4, mind you, just came out this year, or last year, I should say. Organization includes security awareness training, recognizing and reporting potential indicators of insider threats. So they actually look at insider threat too. And here I was kind of excited. I saw, hey, they're going to have roles and responsibilities. So actually might look at what users are doing to determine whether or not they should have more training or not. And then I got down and realized, oh, they're talking about security roles, right? So it's the same thing. I in security have to be trained on how the security program works, but nothing really addressing the individuals. Now, maybe you could wrap it up and say every individual in your organization has a security role, so they should have more training, or if they're an administrator or have privileged access, right? So all this leads to, right, all compliance driven a lot of times. It's usually annual or periodic, and it's checklist driven. Did you understand the policies and procedures that have been explained to you? Do you understand that you're being held legally liable for whatever data, blah, 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 right? It's all CBT or fire safety, so if anyone's ever been in a large facility, like you've had to go through the training for, that's in healthcare, I had to learn how to be safe around MRIs, right? I can't bring metal tools into a radiology suite. I'm sure there's similar things in every one of our organizations. I've also been through, shelter in place for chemical safety and things like that. But that's the kind of thing it's driven. It's driven on cybersecurity, security awareness. It's just going to be in order to keep the organization safe or be compliant, right? It's stale, never changes. It may get updated once a year, or at least reviewed once a year, never really updated. They try to explain the security policies, right? And God help you if you're trying to explain security policies to people, right? Because if your policies are so complex that it require you to actually have to explain them again then in training, you need new policies, right? Policies should be simple and easily understood. And I know compliance makes that very tough. Don't get me wrong. I respect people that can write policies that can both meet compliance and be explainable. And then all these are always taught at the same level. Every user gets taught the same information at the same level, regardless of their role in the organization. The only exception to that typically is when I see developers are trained in secure coding practices. But typically, that's the only ones. So, I know my information said we would talk about some of the latest research. There's not much latest research. There's this research and then there's some newer stuff I'll talk about here in a minute. And overall, this is an area that's such a huge problem, as we've seen from the breaches that we've seen, but no one's researching it. I think the last research, you probably all saw it as well, is the fact that users, when they're faced with the same box, giving them a security warning, and if that box looks identical to the same box they clicked on last time, they're a 90% chance of just clicking, please continue, allow, go on, submit. I submit, right? That's been probably about the only one that I've seen recently in the news, and I try to keep track of this obviously for the talk. So there's not been a ton of research in this. So in 2010, Dr. Quagliata, she looked at, she was out of the University of Fairfax. She's got a psychology degree, but then she also has, she's interested in information security. Fortunately, she didn't get the funding she wanted from doing this little small project. This small sample set just looked at 133 ISOC members, right? She was looking at those 4 things right there. Right, the effectiveness, the frequency, methodology, and topics. So I don't know if you can see here, basically they looked at everybody in a large group and they wanted to look at people that either agreed or strongly agreed. Okay, so that gave them the people that had a positive sense about their information security program. How effective was your organization at protecting the data? That was the essential question. Okay? Now these slides are a little harder to see, but you can see strongly agree, less than strongly agree, and then for the total. So strongly agree at the top there on the far left, right? It says once a year, right? More frequently is just below that, and I think that's not because there are more people that are secured with the idea with once a year is good. I just don't think there's that many programs out there that were doing more than once a year in 2010. Okay, so this data might be skewed a little bit. So the first one was frequency, once a year. Training method, if you're doing a combination of methods, you were doing your basic CBT, all methods, policy and procedures only, blah, 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 as it goes down the list. And you can find this all on ISACA's website, and it's free and open source to look at. So, and then the last one was basically, how do you track those users? Are you doing electronic sign-off? Are you having them sign a document and submit? Are you just having them click a button? Or are you just taking their word on it? So at the end of the day, right, at least annual training, more would be better. Multiple methods are better. Hold users accountable for not training, and teach varied and relevant topics. That's what her small sample set taught her. So there's a research firm out there called Aberdeen who looked at some of the larger IT organizations that were considered effective. Top performers versus lower performers over 4.5 years. The top line represents the top performers in those groups. They were married on a whole variance of metrics that were their IT scorecard on how effective they were at doing information security and IT. But the top IT performing organizations consistently over these quarters had more information security awareness training program investments than the others did. The lower, which is the represent the laggards or the bottom 30% of those organizations, kept pace at about a 30% decrease between the two. So it's, 20-30. Yeah, top 20 versus a lower 30. Yes, I'm sorry.
What's interesting about that data sample isn't the fact that the top performers did better and the bottom performers did worse. It's the fact that the trend won't follow almost the exact same line. When one is tending up, the other is tending up, and one is tending down, the other is tending down. There are a couple of instances where that's not the case, but overall, across that graph, that's a trend of the exact same way.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I thought that was pretty interesting too. It has that sawtooth look to it, but it does continue to go up and down the same. So I apologize, I'm just getting my notes here. And it said that even though these folks had a clear demonstration of the importance of this, it was still over 60% of organizations felt that they didn't have to have any security awareness training that were being tracked in this, okay? So this is only 40% of those organizations were actually in this study of 3,900 organizations for IT over those 5 years. The other thing they did was they looked at doing a Monte Carlo analysis. And I don't know how many, show of hands, how many people here are familiar with a Monte Carlo analysis? Oh, thank goodness. All right, good. Maybe you can explain it to me, because I kind of get it, all right? But what the idea is, you have different sample sets, and you're trying to see all the different outcomes that could be to give you a range. And this is the way it was explained to me, so pardon me if I'm wrong. But they explained that you want to look at all the different types of outcomes, and to give you a range of effectiveness to determine if it's something you want to do. It's basically when you have a large set of data, and then you have another large set of data that you're not quite so confident in. It helps you kind of bridge the gap between those two data sets. But so they looked at users in they took a model company of about 1,000 users, $200 million worth of revenue. Okay, and of that, more than one device. They used down bottles infection rate of 2 to 18.5%. This is where the Monte Carlo analysis comes in because you have a variance. The attribution of infection to actual users. There was this study out of the UK that's between 70 and 90% of malware infections on device were due to users clicking on stuff. I think we would probably kind of agree it's somewhere in there. And then change behavior comparing pre and post training. So Wombat provided a study of all the users that they've been giving continuous training on, and they've consistently shown it's a 45 to 70% improvement in not clicking on stuff, not infecting machines, not doing risky user behavior after their training. So if I can kind of convince you that those are somewhat solid numbers, we'll talk about what their findings were, right? So there's an 80% likelihood that the users result in a total cost of $2.5 million, right? So what this is the cost of remediation, cleanup, response, downtime for the users, downtime for the organization. So out of a $200 million company, $2.5 million, right? But the user awareness drops this down to $1 million if you run the numbers out, right? So there's an 80% chance that'll drop to $1 million, which will be like a 60% decrease in the impact of the organization money-wise. And I'm showing you this because they do this kind of research so they can kind of help you get that money for your program, right? Because how many people in here have compliance help drive their program for money, right? I know I do. I've seen it. Does it drive it enough? No, never does, right? You never feel that you get enough money for your security program, period, but it definitely you don't get enough to go beyond the bottom line of what meets compliance, right? They're never going to pay for more unless you have something happen, right? So there's a 20% chance that the user actions will result in a total cost of $8 million, right? So that's that 70 to 90 and that we talked about earlier, right? 2 to 18.5%. So on the lower end, if it's only 2%, that's actually being the infections. So like a malware infection rate of 2%, right, on those 1,000 users and 200 million of those devices, right? Then the change behavior would be a 55% reduction. So even if it's only 20% effective versus 80% effective, I think we could see that there's true cost savings that could be seen in that model. So I talked a lot about what's state of going on, so a little bit of analysis and research that other people do. So what do we do about it, right? This is very simplistic. I don't have anything that's going to be like mind-numbingly exciting or like totally blow your minds. It's stuff that everybody in here probably already knows. I just put it down on paper. Okay? So you got to figure out what you're trying to achieve. What is it you want to get out of your program or your campaign or that month in your security program, right? And I talk about objective, right? Because I want to see us train less more often, right? Continuous training, not annual training. Just like I want to do continuous monitoring, not annual monitoring, right? Not annual log review. So objective, right? So from our threats and incidents drive our objectives. Our objectives help set up our tests, right? Objectives flow down, and if you're trying to achieve something, you want to drive frequency, right? So we're going to do annually, monthly, quarterly, weekly. What are we going to do? How are we going to deliver it? Are we going to put it in an email? We're going to do posters. We're going to do CBTs. We're going to do in-service. And what I mean in-service is you're actually going to go to those user departments, those user meetings, and talk to users about security. You're going to talk to those systems administrators. You're going to talk to those DBAs. You're going to talk to those sales executives about what they're doing and the risks they represent to the organization. And then the content. What kind of content are you going to drive, right? Are you going to talk about the dangers of wild SA accounts for SQL and how badly they're used everywhere? Or are you going to talk about stop opening attachments and emails, right? Depends on the audience, depends on the risk that person has to the organization. Because the idea is we want to go from just providing security knowledge to actually changing behavior. The only way we can effectively make those users become less risky is to change their behavior, right? So stop communicating policy, train the developers, meet compliance, right? Reduce risk, reduce the malware infections, reduce policy violations. And what I mean by objectives, right? Your objectives shouldn't be in that testing, like did we communicate our policies? Yes, no. Did we train our developers? Yes, no. Did we meet compliance? Yes, no. Right? I want to see actual risk go down because malware infections went down, because policy violations went down. Now, if you're not tracking that, that's a whole other thing, but we'll get into that, right? And there's the little cheesy Gartner thing down here. I don't think it really applies for this audience. Right? So security awareness to security acumen, right? What's that mean? Right? It's trying to take the habits so that way when a user gets into a situation, they're better prepared. And if you've ever heard Jason E Street talk, basically this is exactly what he talks about, right? He talks about taking users from knowing the policy to actually being able to affect change in the organization. It's going from, do not click on links on emails from untrusted senders, because every user knows who an untrusted sender is, right? To actually being able to evaluate the trustworthiness of that sender. To understand that maybe I need a second factor of authentication. Maybe I should pick up that phone and call them and say, hey, did you send me this PowerPoint? Did you send me this PDF? Right? This is pretty simple. Like, what are all the different methods that you want to look at? And people laugh, people talk about posters, but I tell you, a funny poster, just like a funny presentation or a meme, I'm sure we've all been in talks where you get in there and stuff kind of drives the message home. It's a lot more fun. It works. If you're trying to affect passwords and password policy, right? Great. In service, you want to talk to users, you want to drive security awareness. There's all sorts of things out there from the FTC, there's stuff from SANS, there's all of these things that are about securing the human. You can share that kind of information as well and repurpose it, right? Make it personal to the users, so that way they can take it home and apply it to their family and their situations, right? Because CryptoLocker's hitting everybody at home, right? I'm sure we've all gotten the call like, hey, can you help me figure out what's wrong with my machine? I've got an infection, right? How would you like to be able to sit down with that person and be like, hey, this is what you need to do. Stop doing this, stop doing that, right? Emails are effective. Newsletters are effective. Just don't put them in the link and don't put them on a PDF, right? Because put them in the body of the email. Make it plain text. I know it's boring, but you can put some images in there as well. I love this. So how many people here are familiar with the Standards of Conduct Office? Okay, so DoD takes everybody who gets a credit card or has any sort of budgetary power and runs them through this training. So if you've ever read through a lot of DoD material, it's not exactly compelling or exciting. It's a lot of like, you shall, you shall, you shall. But they actually tell stories, right? They looked at this and said, every time there's an incident, let's make a story. And that story will drive a part of compliance. It will drive why we have these rules about why you should not have, why you're trusted, and when you violate that trust, how bad that looks, right? So when a general gets on a plane and he goes with a defense contractor to Aloha for 3 weeks, all paid by the defense contractor, right? And then it comes to find out that he then later on provided them first spot in a proof of concept. That's one of the stories that's told, right? It's not, you shall not, get any gift over $25. You'll have to report and pay for yourself, blah, 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 right? So tell stories. And then talk about how real actions led to real consequences. Because you can go and talk about the breaches, which is fine, but you need to be able to make that connection between what that user did and all the way through the kill chain. What that user did, what that led to, what then that information was able to get that attacker, the escalation of privileges, and the exfil of data once they found it, right? And then don't quote policy that no one bothered to read in the first place. Okay, if your security awareness program is, we're just going to go ahead and show you the same policy that you were supposed to read when you first joined the organization, which, by the way, hasn't been updated since they wrote it as well. It's got things in there about logic bombs and why you shouldn't use a fax machine, which I've seen in actual policies. Don't quote it. So risk-based, right? We risk-base our information, right? So we do data classification. We do asset classification, right? So we look at the assets, whether they're data or they're devices or systems, and we see the data that's inside them and give that a risk rating because it's valuable data, right? Why are we not doing the same thing with users? Why are we not risk rating our users? Probably because all our users have admin rights, but no. I mean, we're not doing it because it's hard, right? We need to determine the rights that our users have, tie accounts to individuals, and make sure that you understand that those individuals present a certain risk to your organization. And then train them through that risk. If I have developers, I'm going to give them code training, right? If I have administrators, I'm going to give them training on the platform that they're administering. But it's going to be security focused. And you know what? If you don't have that expertise, if you're a one guy in a whole shop full of different talented IT individuals, reach out. This is what this con's about. Find somebody who knows about something you don't. And you ask them, well, what do you do? How do you train your users? Find out. Find out what they're doing. Find out what their specialties are. I mean, that's what the bios are for. I mean, in the books, talk to people, see what's going on. Talk amongst yourselves. Talk among in the community. Get in your user groups. I mean, we've got 4 security groups here in town, in Indy. And I'm sure you have the same in your towns, right? Go to those meetings. Find out what's going on. Talk to people. Or, if you're lucky enough to have somebody in your organization in a particular specialty, and they really like security, have them do it. Have them train you. Sit down and listen to what they have to say about security awareness, or the security of that platform. If you've got somebody that's really great about Windows and you're not, if you're more of a network guy, then have that Windows administrator give that training and talk about it. And I'm not saying send them to SANS. That'd be great if you got the money. But if you don't, do that. But you should be at every one of the department meetings, right? I understand if you're a CISO, probably not easy. But if you guys in this room are in the trenches, like I think you are, like me, right? Or I was, you're going to be at those meetings. Hear what's going on. Ask them how it's impacting security or what they think about it, right? I really drove that home. Wow. Okay. Oh, so yeah. Let's talk about, what they do. If they got web-based email, right, they need to be understanding of the dangers of giving up their credentials and then having their emails boxes emptied out, right? If they got a mailbox size over 100 meg, God only knows what kind of data is in there, right? What kind of spreadsheets and embarrassing information is in there. And then explain the how and why, the policies and procedures, right? And what I mean by this is how many times have you had a user go, well, I just didn't know how to report a stolen laptop. I didn't know who to talk to. Like, it's been gone for 2 weeks. What do you mean you didn't know who to go to? Well, show me on the website where I needed to go. And it took me 15 minutes. I couldn't find it. Right? Because I wrote it and I gave it to somebody who then gave it to somebody else who was going to put it on some page somewhere. Did I go look and see where it ended up? No. And then it wasn't until then. Now, by golly, I made sure it got after that it was very apparent to everybody, management to every end user, where they reported a stolen device. But if we don't do a good job on corporate communications, and I know corporate communications is boring, but it's something you need to do. If you have an internal marketing department, if you have an internal corporate communications, if you have an internal HR department, use them. Their job, literally, is to educate people and get them to do things, right? So marketing, have a marketing campaign around user awareness. And I say campaign because what I wanted you to do is break it up, right? Let's look at the annual plan. We want to look at users and then we want to test those users. And not just test them once. If you're doing an annual plan and you want to see how effective it is, I challenge you to do this. You give them that annual training and then you test them at 30, 60, 120 days past it. And if they're just as effective at 120 at passing the test as they were 30, then you know what? Annual training may be enough. It may be enough for your organization. But I've yet really to see anybody be very successful at that. And it doesn't have to be a test. It doesn't have to be a test of, I'm going to send you a questionnaire. It can be a red team exercise. An internal red team. I don't say you have to go hire somebody on 30, 60, 120. We would love to see that at Rook, obviously. We would love to be hired to come in 4 times a year to do it, but you can do it at home. You can pick up the phone, you can call your users and ask them for the password. You can send them an email and try to see if they click on a link, right? But do that test and see. That's what I want to drive is continuous training versus continuous monitoring, right? You wouldn't wait a year to check out your logs and your IDS. You wouldn't wait a year to review your logs for access control. You wouldn't wait a year to take a look at what your firewall is doing. At least I hope not, right? And I would hope your management would be asking you before then, how are we doing, right? Wouldn't you love to be able to say, well, how we're doing actually is real well. We've got 2 campaigns going on in security awareness. We've seen user click-through rates drop dramatically since the first time we gave it. And we really feel that we're more prepared for our next phishing engagement we do with a red team. That would be powerful for an executive to hear on what you're doing, right? And something that probably makes a little more sense to them than saying, we just got the IDSs in place. We've got signatures coming from 2 different feeds. Our threat intel is it's spot on. We really feel like we've got a great partner in that space. They're not going to understand what you're talking about. They'll probably nod and be like, yeah, great. Sounds like you're doing your job, right? But if you can wrap it up to something that they understand, training, users, these are things that are common across every business unit in the business, right? Less training more often. Talk about teachable moments. Now, this is something I stole blatantly from Wombat, so thanks. Wombat does what they call teachable moments. So they will do the engagement where they'll send you the email, you click through, falling for the phishing failure, right? And then they're going to take you to a fail page and then have you watch a 5-minute video or 5-second video, or no, it's 35-second video about why you shouldn't have clicked on this, right? And then click you over to a referral page in IT where they can either then maybe sign you up for more training and then in service or make sure you get on the newsletter from then on about phishing. those are teachable moments, right? There were a lot of scientists working at Wombat to figure it out. It's much easier and more effective to user, more effective to change those behaviors than it is to do the awareness, right? And then, split it up. Thinking about, do you want to take 12 topics and cover over here? And I know you think 12 topics for users. What can that be? Well, it can be like, how do I send secure information? How do I send information securely outside of my organization, right? How do I use PGP to encrypt a file and send it out, right? You don't have to say that in a training. You could say, how do I send a file secretly from one person to another, right? And walk them through what in your organization, who's in your organization is responsible for that, right? Or do you have a technology? Are you using a Zix or some other sort of secure email that you can help them with, right? Help them understand why it's there and how to get involved with it. Security should be there to help users understand how to take advantage of security. And the other thing this does, when you do this kind of thing and you talk about what security does, you help the organization understand why you're there and why you keep bugging them. You show value to the business and to the user because you're helping them keep secure. So great. We're going to do this program. We got our topics. We're going to go. So how do we test, right? And this really is $1 million question. And these are just my ideas. I don't think there's any fact or science behind it. But give them a questionnaire, because I've seen questionnaires given out with all sorts of security training, right? It's easy. You write the questions, you give it to them. Don't give everybody the same 5 questions. Don't give the same 5 questions every time. Get a bank of questions. And I know questions suck. It's hard to write them, but you can do it. Just sit down for an afternoon and do it. I've done it. But give them an option to test out, right? Don't infuriate everybody because they have to have the annual training for compliance, right? If they understand the risk and they understand because your user awareness training is working, let them test out. It still demonstrates that they know what they're talking about, but that's where you can't have the same 5 questions every time, okay? Do a phishing exercise. You can do them on your own. I'm sure there's been people that have talked about all the different phish me's and everything else that are out there. I'm not going to say either engage somebody or do it yourself. Limited scope pen test, red teaming. Figure it out. Call up your users. Pick somebody that's, maybe have failed in the past, or are particularly risky to the organization, or have way too many privileges for the systems than they need. That's your best bet for driving why they need those privileges taken away. You want to do application whitelisting? Take everybody who failed and put them on an application whitelisting. They become your beta testers all of a sudden. Because if you go back to executives and say, well, Mary and Bill and Steve, they click through on every one of they have failed 100% of the time for the past 4 engagements. That's a powerful thing to say. Yeah, they probably don't need admin rights, and they probably need application whitelisting, right? And then that user goes back and says, why did you do this to me? I'm like, well, you failed 4 times in a row. I tested you every time. You had a chance, right? And then you can review configuration management, and that's more when I talk about the application whitelisting. Measure results against your objectives, right, and then report those to leadership. Like I talked about earlier, it's nice to be able to sit in the elevator and talk about with your executives what you're doing and why they're paying so much for you, or not, or why you need more people, or whatever. You can start talking about those conversations when you have metrics, right? Everybody has opinions, but who has facts? My favorite, incentives. Who here has ever been paid for completing a training? Cash. Yeah, that's what I thought. I haven't either, by the way. But how awesome would it be if you were like, you know what, I want $1,000 for our security awareness training. That's all I want. And I guarantee I'll get you 100% done. What executive wouldn't want that return on investment, right? If I had $1,000 they hand out for the first person to take the exam, got $100. Next 5 or 50 or how many people you have, they get it in drawings for $200, right? Maybe you get some cash bounties for reporting a security incident. If they get a red team, the first person that calls in your red team engagement, they get a bonus. They get a card. They get something, right? Maybe if you can't give out cash at work, maybe you figure out some sort of other initiative, right? You give them a button of the week or whatever, right? You give them something. There's got to be something in your organization that recognizes employees. How are we doing on time? Okay, all right. Sorry, I heard applause next door, so then I got nervous all of a sudden. We talked about make leadership, add it to the work goals, right? This was always my favorite. Well, your goals say that you're going to participate in training, security awareness training, So if you don't meet your goals, right, you're not meeting goals, you're not doing your training, right, you fail. So make HR work for you. Now, I don't like that they hammer so much as I like, the honey. I'd rather give them some incentives to do it. But if you can't get the incentives, then at least make sure it's part of your policy, or part of the goals for the organization. Because I guarantee you and security are working for HR a lot, right? How many times have you been asked for a report on a user's behavior? I know I have. How many times have you been asked to shut down somebody's access Friday at 6 p.m. when you're ready to go home, and then sit there and wait to collect all their stuff? Make them work for you. Make them work for you. Make them track those users, and if they've met their compliance, and if they've met their training requirements, right? And that's what I say, go back to marketing, right? That's our whole job. Get somebody up higher to say, well, we can't engage a firm, or we can't hire somebody to run security awareness training. I was like, well, if you could just give me somebody from marketing who knows about marketing campaigns, and I could sit down with them and put out together a communications plan for 12 months about these 8 topics I really want to cover, these 12 topics, these 6 topics I really want to cover in security. They're going to drive metrics. They're going to drive those incidents down, right? Then follow through. Whatever you do, please don't make the argument to the executives and then 3 months into it just gets too hard. You got to go back to the executives and say, I can't do this because X. I can't do this because you're firing too many people and I'm constantly having to do changes and moves, right? Or whatever it is. With whatever resource is constraining you, if you've proven the value and you've gotten approval to do it, don't give up. Because you want to have effective change. You want to change user behavior, right? And don't let anyone perceive that you don't take it serious. Because that'll kill a security awareness program faster than anything you've ever seen. Now, we've all had the wall of shame where you put up the tickets of every ridiculous thing you've seen. Desktop guys do it everywhere. You've had all the jokes go around about the bad things that users do. That's what these security conferences are for, right? We get together, we drink, we complain about users. But when we go back to our businesses, be serious, right? Show passion. And the passion I know you all have. That's why you're here. Oh, I went the wrong way. So in summary, right, let's talk about the 3 E's. And I stole these 3 E's from Jason. If you picked up on a theme here, it's all about thievery apparently. So Jason talked about when he goes in and does an engagement, he does educate, he does the empower, and then he does the enforcement, right? So what he does is he gets an organization to bring him in to educate, right? So then he feels that he gives the users the tools to make them empowered in those situations to make the right call. In his engagements, typically with social engineering, it's be forceful enough to say, maybe I shouldn't open that door for the guy with packages in his hand, or maybe I should ask him why he's back here behind the counter working with the computers, or I should ask him for an ID or something, right? And then enforce. You got to have a sanction policy. As much as we try to entice people, as much as we try to incentivize them, there are folks that are not going to get it. And you need to have a policy that says if you don't, then you have things that happen. There are bad consequences to bad behavior, right? That's the only way you can force behavior change, sometimes with some individuals. You need to say, and I'm not saying the sanction policy needs to be you're fired if you get phished, all right? I'm saying that maybe you go to the bottom of the computer refresh file, or maybe you get application whitelisting. Maybe you lose administrative rights. Maybe we take a look at what applications are running on your machine and exactly what you're doing. You become in our premier group of people that we monitor, right? Whatever it may be, right? Think of something that's going to have consequences. And then my last E, which is enrich, right? Incentive. So I wanted to take Jason's 3 E's and put it into this kind of context. I want to add enrichment on there because what I want to do is incentivize those users if I can. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions? I know I kind of covered it and went all over the place, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to hear what you have to say. Yes?
You mentioned that obviously there's a wide variety of different setups that you can get, different tasks that they might achieve. And one of them, I think, is common to us, although obviously someone has to use, right?
Right.
One, if the first person is working on the training right now.
Right.
That, kind of in play, people going to do it every time.
Right. Now, I think you have to, you're absolutely right. So there's going to be, somebody's going to game the system every time, right? So I think what you got to do is you got to set those rules for success, right? So successfully, what I mean by successfully complete, meaning that they're able to pass the test. whatever that test may be, right? Whether that's a questionnaire or whatever, right? If it's something like that. So if it's, you've got to kind of figure that out. I agree with you. That is definitely a vulnerability that I had not thought out a lot, but you're right. There's going to be those people that would take advantage of the system. Do you have any ideas on what you would do?
No, I mean, clearly you're saying that you
Right.
clearly would want to do that. You want to do it.
Right.
But at the same time, you know, you've already previously run into that, you know, some sales force people start.
Right. Right, good point. Yeah. You know, if you're the second winner, the second first time winner again, like, wait a minute, what's going on here, right? No. And I need to do that. Maybe that's a great thing for me to write about later on, is maybe actually come up with an incentive program and plan, right? And kind of think about how I would keep it from getting gamed. So thank you. Yes, sir. Yeah, right. So, and if anyone heard the question in the back, so basically it's like, how do you keep real stories with real consequences becoming FUD, right? And making everyone super paranoid, right? I think a little paranoia is good, as I think you all agree, right? We're a little too trusting at times, our users especially. But you can't let it get in the way of doing business, right? That's a good question. As I think about it, you know, yeah, Tom, do you have a comment? Please. I agree with you, and I don't want to disparage that at all. I think what he's talking about a little bit though might be FUD getting in the way of empowerment, right? Because we want to make those users, we want them to be thinking, right? But then ultimately we need them to take an action, because if their actions call Tom up every time, like, you know, Grandma has Tom, I've got a link here I need to click, right? That's going to make your day go really slow, and it's going to make that loved one never get anything done, right? I agree. Right. As you can see in this room with a lot of people with a lot of different opinions, yes, sir. Yeah, please. Right. Right. So that storytelling, though, yeah, it can be. I think you gotta. It's hard to do in a small organization, right? The federal government can do it, right? Because not everybody knows everybody. But if you have, 100 employees, most likely they're all going to know before even you know that somebody lost their laptop, right? Or that somebody clicked on something that they shouldn't have, because they're going to get the 5 emails from that person that clicked on the link, full of spam and full of infections, right? So it's harder to do in a small organization. I don't want to say that. I don't want to paint that as this is scalable, because it's not. But maybe you can figure out if there's some way to share that, like at these events, right? Or get a little creative writing juices going and write up some incidents that are much like what you've read or heard about or discussed with other organizations. Any other questions? Comments? Bull crap? Anything? All right. All right. Thank you, guys. I really